couple months ago I went for the wheel alignment and it was pretty good, but a couple of weeks ago I started feeling a little bit like the steering wheel is nervous on the road, a little shaking. Not a lot, but a little bit. I felt like unstable on the road, but the roads were not really well maintained, so I thought it's kind of like a black ice or something. And then a few days later I started hearing that noise, like a Michael Jackson Thriller when somebody was opening the door, that creepy sound from the front right wheel. So I kind of knew what's happening. CV axle probably is going. I want to show you what I did. But now the steering is pretty firm again. I have no troubles, no shake. I feel stable on the road. The car has a grip again, so it solved my problem. I put my car on my little ramps here so I can have some more room to work on it underneath. And I also choke my rear wheel on the driver's side. I engaged the parking brake and I left my transmission in neutral. So this was the reason I had to replace the CV axle on passenger side, on the right hand side, on my 05 Accord manual transmission 2.4 engine, 2.4 liter. This is a 36 mil nut, not 22, 32, whatever. It's 36 millimeter nut with a locking kind of like a tab in here. So you have to, like, I'll take this off. Just this kind of like a washer or whatever it's called. It's tapped into this groove or slot, so you have to pry it with a flathead screwdriver. 36 mil with the wheel on the ground, loosen it up, and then take the wheel off. I just didn't take the nut off yet. Then I removed this lower ball joint. So there is a 17 mil funky looking nut with this securing pin. The next thing I removed was this long bolt on this fork of the strut, so 17 millimeters on both sides. Then I removed the nut and again this secure pin from the tie rod ball joint here from the steering. Then I removed two 10 millimeter bolts on this bracket here. I got this brake line off of my way, so there are two 10 millimeter bolts on the right hand side. And on the left hand side I have this ABS cable, so there is one 10 millimeter bolt here, there is another 10 millimeter nut up here, so I got this pretty nice and loose. As you can see, I didn't take this brake caliper off at all. I didn't touch it, I just left it here as it is. I did try to lose that 14 mil bolt on the sway bar link, but this car is 2005 and I don't think anybody changed that. So this is, I believe, still original. So good luck with that. Like, I tried to heat it up, tried to use a liquid range, any combination, it didn't work. There is a 5 millimeter Allen key in the middle, so you can hold it right there. No change in my case. I just wanted to remove it because of the easier movement of the lower control arm. But what I did to lower it, I used my pry bar, I inserted into this opening and I pry down when I needed to. So once I had everything removed, I tap it with a hammer in here to loosen this connection between in this spline here. Then I remove the nut, I slide this over as much as I could, and I remove the outer CV axle from the knuckle hub. So it kinda looked like this. So the axle between the fork and the lower control arm facing, of course, right there. And that comes the fun part. Okay, I'm underneath the car. This is obviously off already, but I want to show you where I hit it against this surface here. You have to give it a good whack, and then it disconnects from the intermediate shaft, which comes from the transmission to this bracket here, right? There is very limited space if you have this car just jacked up only. I have just 3 4x6s, so this is 4, 8, 12 inches plus 2, let's say 14, not even 14 inches of room between the chassis and the ground, so there is not too much room to play with. And I found a nice long piece for this purpose for me, which I got from a friend of mine. He got me so many useful things here. I hold it like that and I gave it a sledge on the end. So it was a little bit painful because it's really not too much room in here, but that's how I did it. And then I obviously just pull it out of the car, just like this, and slide it between the fork and the lower arm, just like that. I just want to point out at this top ball joint from the top arm, I didn't touch that one, so it holds the whole assembly nice and steady in one place. I don't have to deal with any bungee cords or anything like that. And this is still nice, pretty loose. Also this ABS sensor cable, so there is no tension, nothing on the brake line. Yeah, I know it's pretty oily in here, but that's a different problem on this engine. But now I just want to show you that just want to make sure that there is this circlip at the end of the spline of the intermediate shaft. Try to zoom it in. A little bit better detail. It's right here at the end of my flathead screwdriver. So the circlip is there. Okay, and just make sure it's there. Usually it's there. I'm not sure if you have to replace it or the old one is good. I'm gonna leave the old one there. So what I'm gonna do here is gonna clean the mating surface. So just like that, no solvents, no harsh chemicals, just a clean rock. I just put this fork from the strut assembly against the lower arm, so it makes me nice and easy gap for my new CV axle to install it in there. And this is my new CV axle on the passenger side, obviously, with a brand new nut at the end. And I compare the length of those two laying on the flat surface, and they just look the same. Everything looks the same. Before I install this new CV axle on, I put a little bit of grease inside on this spline, just a little bit, and also just a little slightly bit on this surface here. It slides into the seal. And I leave it sit nice and easy right here in this position, so between the fork and the lower control arm, and with the end of the CV axle just very close to intermediate shaft. Try to install it as parallel as possible so I will not damage the seal, and the grease I put on at the end of the CV axle should help me to install a little bit easier. So I pushed it in by hand, it went in nice and easy, so then I can actually move the fork the way that the lower control arm sits right between those two pieces of that fork, and there is no tension, no pressure. So I'll double check how it looks like on the bottom. And from the bottom of the car it looks just perfectly fine. It sits okay. I try to pull it holding this piece, the inner joint or inner part of the CV axle, and try to pull it out. It's not going out, so the circlip does his job perfectly fine. It's not gonna go anywhere. I'm happy with this. So if this is the inner side of the CV axle, I try to pull it holding it like this. I didn't try to pull it holding it like that, because if you hold it here and you pull on the CV axle, there is a system of bearings in here which can actually disassemble, and then it is really pain in the butt to get it back in. So always pull it on that side, and if you're disassembling, I just hit it on this side of the CV axle from here against this flat surface. So once the CV axle is installed on intermediate shaft, it's time to install the CV axle into a wheel hub. So first thing I'm gonna do is to apply a little bit of grease in here. And here. And I clean this mating surface of the wheel hub as well. Once the CV axle is in there, I try to set it up on the lower ball joint. The lower ball joint is in place. I have to admit it was a little bit of pain. I needed 3 hands, maybe even 4. So I use my breaker bar to put it into this opening of the lower control arm. I press it down with one hand, and with the other I try to push the fork of the strut assembly a little bit closer to the middle of the car, so away from me, and also try to adjust this lower ball joint into the hole, into the opening. But it's there now and it's good to go. I just need to fix this plate. It's a little bit crooked, as you see. Okay, so it's time to install the nut on the ball joint, then this bolt across the lower control arm and the fork, and also this tie rod end into the steering knuckle. Of course, clean all those surfaces first. This funky looking goes on the lower ball joint. This regular looking nut goes on the tie rod control arm. Then this type of nut goes onto this bolt on the fork. So I tighten those bolts and nuts by hand, nice and snug. I'm gonna start with this lower ball joint, then I'm gonna install this pin afterwards. The torque is 66 to 72 foot-pounds, and I go with 66. We'll see where this hole in the ball joint matches these openings or groove or slots in the nut, and then I install it. So you shouldn't loosen the nut to align it with this hole, but you should rather tighten it a little more. So I start with the 66 foot-pounds, we'll see where it goes, and then I will go from there. So this is where it ended, at 66 foot-pounds. So I have to go a little bit further to align that hole with those slots in that nut. Not loosen it, but tighten it down. Well, it's pretty close now, so I'm gonna install the pin and secure it on the other side. So the pin is installed, and I bent the rear side of the pin. One went up and second go down all the way around this thread of the ball joint. So moving from the lower ball joint to the bolt which holds the fork against the lower control arm, 47 foot-pounds, 17 millimeters again. And I will continue with this guy, tie rod end to knuckle, 40 foot-pounds, 17 millimeters. So it's tightened down to 40 foot-pounds, and there is this little safety pin, so I'm gonna install the one and spread those ends at the end of this thread. Okay, it's nicely done, so it's time to move those 10 millimeter bolts. So there are 2 bolts on this side of this assembly. So this one is not the one who actually goes in here, because this one doesn't have a washer. It's a little bit shorter. So that guy goes on the other side, right here. But you will use 2 bolts with a washer, and they're a little longer on the right side of this assembly. So there is like a 10 Newton meters or 7 foot-pounds. Same thing on the left hand side, right here. and same for the nut up here. Now it's finally time to play with this CV axle nut. But before I do that, I have to install the wheel and lower the car on the ground. With the wheel installed and on the ground, I remove this axle nut and I'm gonna apply a little tiny bit of oil on the mating surface before the install. There are two torque specifications. Just depends if you have automatic or manual transmission. It's 181, so 181 foot-pounds for my manual transmission, and there is 134 foot-pounds for automatic transmission. And this is 2005 2.4 liter manual transmission Honda Accord, made in US. This is 36 mil nut. So after I torque this nut down, I just use the big flathead screwdriver and I hit this place of the nut towards this groove, so I locked it in place. So when I finish my axle nut, there is only one thing left to do. Just torque down those 5 wheel lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds, and then probably 200 kilometers later double check the torque again and take it for a drive. Almost forgot, the very last thing to do is to install my center wheel cap.